2020 election is still not over, as the Trump campaign continues to push voter fraud allegations. Are voting machines truly secure? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Good news, everyone. We've just learned that the 2020 U.S. election was the most secure election in history. And yet, despite it being the most secure election in history, Trump continues to tweet baseless claims of election fraud in swing states. If you'd like to know more about some of the claims of voter fraud, check out my previous episode, Voter Fraud, the election isn't over yet. A big focus of Trump's totally baseless claims is that voting machines and vote counting machines, particularly those made by Dominion voting systems, could be vulnerable to fraud, which is totally baseless if I haven't said that already. Now yes, there were some problems in Georgia with Dominion vote counting machines. In one county, Dominion machines crashed. And in the other two counties, there was a technical glitch with the voting machines after technicians made an upload to the machines the night before the election. According to one of the local election supervisors, that is something that they don't ever do. I've never seen them update anything the day before the election. She did not know what the upload contained. And if that sounds fishy, get this. State election officials and Dominion have been adamant that no such last-minute update occurred and that no change was made to the poll books after October 31st. Which raises the question, who were the technicians that came in to make the update on November 2nd? Obviously, they were time travelers who came from the future to fix the past. But don't worry about those technicians. 2020 was still the most secure election in history, except there were also some voting machine issues in Michigan.
In Michigan, it was partially to blame for the 6,000 miscounted votes in Michigan's Antrim County. A skewed result initially saw Biden as winning the traditionally red county, but when corrected, they found out Trump actually won. The Antrim County clerk, Cheryl Guy, initially attributed the problem to a combination of a software glitch and human error. But just today, county officials backpedaled on the statement, saying the Dominion software had no part in the mistake, now blaming the problem solely on human error.
You see, the problem was solely human error. Again, this was the most secure election in history. The Washington Post says Trump is grasping at straws. And the New York Times says they called election officials in every state and they said there was no evidence of fraud. Well, as long as the officials who would get in trouble if there was fraud said there was no fraud, then I'm convinced. And I certainly would never contradict what the mainstream media says, because it's the mainstream media's job to contradict itself. See, back in 2018, the New York Times called voting machines a crisis of election security. And in 2019, the Washington Post said voting machines would be vulnerable to hacking in 2020. It starts off, now there's proof. The voting machines used in the 2020 contest are still incredibly insecure. Well, I certainly am starting to feel a bit insecure. So what's changed? How did we go from a crisis of election security to the most secure election in history in just a year or two? Good job, everyone. We fixed everything. Except we didn't. I'll explain what I mean after the break. Welcome back. If the media were saying just last year the 2020 election would be insecure and vulnerable to hacks, then how did it become the most secure election in history? Well, it requires a bit of doublethink. According to Harry Hursty, an expert on electronic voting interviewed by the Washington Post in 2019, it's impossible to patch the gaping security holes in U.S. election security, even by Election Day. Everyone claiming we can fix this by 2020 is giving a false sense of security. The aim should be, can we do something by 2022 or 2024? So, the most secure election in history is just a false sense of security? There are just 3 main companies that supply 80% of the country's voting machines and vote counting machines: Election Systems and Software, or ES&S, Dominion Voting, and Hart Intercivic. Dominion equipment is being used in 28 states, including all 5 states where there are currently lawsuits or hand recounts initiated by the Trump administration. Voting machines are a profitable industry, making about $300 million a year. And like many big, rich corporations, these 3 voting machine companies have incredible lobbying power. This is something Democrats have criticized in the past, like Democratic Senator Ron Wyden, a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. In 2019, he and a group of Democrats wrote in this letter, "The voting machine lobby, led by the biggest company, ES&S, believes they are above the law. They have not had anybody hold them accountable even on the most basic matters." And according to the expert I mentioned earlier, lobbying has made it very difficult to address the gaping security issues in these voting systems. Vendors have used legal threats to create a chilling effect on research of their equipment, and that they were actively trying to shoot the messengers rather than reckon with the weaknesses in their products. Take Georgia, for example, a key swing state that had issues with Dominion voting equipment in the recent past. During Georgia's primary elections in June this year, Dominion equipment caused havoc. While some Democrats in the Georgia legislature had opposed the purchase of this type of system, there is some evidence that heavy lobbying and sales tactics have played a role in their adoption in Georgia and elsewhere. There were lawsuits trying to stop the state from using Dominion equipment. In October, a federal judge in Georgia responded to the lawsuit, writing that Dominion equipment presents serious system security vulnerability and operational issues that may place plaintiffs and other voters at risk of deprivation of their fundamental right to cast an effective vote that is accurately counted. However, that same judge ruled against removing Dominion equipment for the presidential election. She said removing it would cause voter confusion. And now, Georgia is in the midst of the largest recount in U.S. history. So what kind of vulnerabilities do these electronic voting machines and vote counting machines present? Well, there's a lot, and I'll go over some of them after the break. Welcome back. Guess what? It took hackers just 2 hours to break into voting machines. That happened at an event called Voting Village at DefCon, a World Hackers Convention. They found a wide variety of serious flaws, ranging from weak default passwords to shoddy encryption. They were even able to hack into the poll books to play Doom and display Nyencat. You know, I wouldn't mind if Nyencat was president. Sure, we'd have to listen to the song forever, but that would still be better than the rest of 2020. I, for one, welcome our new Pop-Tart Rainbow Cat overlord. Anyway, those hackers found some pretty upsetting things about ES&S and Dominion machines. For instance, ES&S had some easily guessed passwords that were even stored on the device. One Dominion product has documented medium to high-level vulnerabilities. And perhaps even more disturbing, another Dominion product had a software file that could be manipulated to redirect votes to a different candidate. But I'm sure they fixed all those problems since this was the most secure election in history. But the Voting Village Hackers Convention does have its critics, particularly the voting equipment companies. They say what happens at DefCon is unrealistic. They've argued that the free-for-all environment at DefCon doesn't replicate the realities of security on Election Day. Basically, you're not going to see a hacker being able to sit down with the hardware and a screwdriver for a couple hours at a voting station. But that doesn't matter, because according to Matt Blaze, Georgetown University cryptography professor and one of DefCon's election testing co-founders, hackers could probably compromise the machines even if they weren't anywhere near them, especially if the poll workers made mistakes setting them up or took shortcuts. Basically, hackers can get remote access. And poll workers do seem to make a lot of mistakes. According to the New York Times in 2018, before they changed their tune, many of the election officials didn't know how to use the technology and were forced to rely on voting machine employees to troubleshoot problems. ES&S even installed remote access software themselves so they could access it from headquarters. And if something went wrong, it was the voting machine company that told the news media and public what went wrong. Somehow, I don't imagine independent poll watchers were allowed into ES&S's headquarters. This also happened in the Georgia primaries this year, as I mentioned. Dominion personnel were given complete access to the computer systems. That's again according to Harry Hursty. He was observing the primary voting in Georgia, and in a declaration under oath, he said it appeared there was remote access to Dominion equipment. And he said, if in fact remote access was arranged and granted to the server, this has gravely serious implications for the security of the new Dominion system. Remote access, regardless how it is protected and organized, is always a security risk. But furthermore, it is a transfer of control out of the physical perimeters and deny any ability to observe the activities. And one of the major complaints of the Trump campaign is that poll observers were prevented from being able to observe these kinds of vote counting activities. But even if these companies don't give themselves remote access, it's still super easy for outside hackers to break in. I'll be back in a moment to explain. Welcome back. Even if the voting machine companies themselves aren't causing any problems in the vote collecting or vote counting, there's a potential problem from outside hackers. According to Security Ledger, many electronic voting systems are essentially unsecurable, built on top of outdated and no longer supported operating systems like Windows 2000, or designed insecurely with application code containing hidden backdoor accounts and exploitable software holes. Wait, some of them are running Windows 2000? No wonder the screensaver on my voting machine looked familiar. At any rate, many voting machines that election officials insist are disconnected from the internet and therefore beyond the reach of hackers are in fact accessible by way of the modems they use to transmit vote totals on election night. And this could allow hackers to access the machines and spread malicious code. According to the New York Times, attackers could design their code to bypass pre-election testing and kick in only at the end of an election or under specific conditions, say when a certain candidate appears to be losing, and erase itself afterward to avoid detection. And they could make it produce election results with wide margins to avoid triggering automatic manual recounts in states that require them when results are close. Which sounds disturbingly similar to what the Trump campaign alleges happened in the election. And then there's problems with the touchscreens used by some voting machines. A malicious actor could get into ES&S's network and could conceivably corrupt these touchscreen files so machines misinterpret a vote for Donald Trump, say, as one for his opponent, or vice versa. Remember, that's the New York Times that said that in 2018. But now in 2020, of course Dominion definitely didn't have any problems. Most secure election in history. I mean, there was that time in 2004 when ES&S touchscreens in one county interpreted votes for John Kerry as votes for Bush, which apparently is not an uncommon problem when touchscreens are poorly calibrated. But what happens if a malicious actor is the one making those touchscreens? According to a study by security firm Interos, 1/5 of the hardware and software components in a popular voting machine came from suppliers in China. Furthermore, close to 2/3 of components in that voting machine came from companies with locations in both China and Russia. That includes touchscreens. Now, I haven't seen any evidence so far that foreign components played a role in incorrect vote counts. But foreign components have been enough of a concern that even the voting machine companies are asking the US government to do something about it. In fact, they said they would welcome comprehensive regulations from the federal government on the issue. Private companies asking the government for regulations. You don't see that too often. But just in the crazy off chance that voting machines might have been tampered with, is there any kind of fail-safe to double-check the election results? Well, sometimes. There are basically two types of voting machines in the U.S. Optical vote counting machines, which scan and count paper ballots, and direct recording electronic machines, where voters make their selections digitally through a touch screen. Those votes are stored electronically, though some of them also create a paper trail. According to the New York Times, a manual comparison of paper ballots to digital tallies is the best method we have to detect when something has gone wrong in an election. 22 states still use paper ballots for just these security reasons, including Georgia, which, as I mentioned, is in the midst of the largest retally in U.S. history. But even that can be susceptible to fraud. Not all states perform audits, and many that do simply run the paper ballots through a scanner a second time. Fewer than half the states do manual audits, and they typically examine ballots from randomly chosen precincts in a county, instead of a percentage of ballots from all precincts. If the randomly chosen precincts aren't ones where hacking occurred, or where machines failed to accurately record votes, an audit won't reveal anything. Nor will it always catch problems with early voting, overseas, or absentee ballots, all of which are often scanned in county election offices, not in precincts. If the Georgia recount shows a different result, that might trigger recounts in the other 27 states where Dominion equipment is being used. By way of example, there was a hand recount in Windham, New Hampshire after the initial machine count, and it turned out, during the hand recount, the numbers changed drastically, with each Republican candidate gaining around 300 votes. That might not sound like much, but it's actually more than 3% in a county where only 9,000 people are voting. And 3% is enough to swing a lot of elections. As the New York Times said back in 2018, the ballot box is the foundation of any democracy. It's not too grand to say that if there's a failure in the ballot box, then democracy fails. If the people don't have confidence in the outcome of an election, then it becomes difficult for them to accept the policies and actions that pour forth from it. And in the United States, it's safe to say, though few may utter it publicly, that the ballot box has failed many times and is poised to fail again. Which is why I'm sure the New York Times is thrilled that the Trump campaign wants to ensure confidence in the election with a thorough investigation. So what do you think about the vulnerabilities of voting machines? Do you think there should be an audit to make sure the results were accurate? What if it means your preferred candidate loses? Tell me what you think in the comments below. And remember, America Uncovered does not have the resources of the New York Times or CNN. We need your support to keep the show going. Contribute to America Uncovered on patreon.com/AmericaUncovered. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.